Yeah, so a while ago we talked about Ann Wortham, and you know way more about her and her book The Other Side of Racism than I do. So like for me and our viewers, tell me what it's about, what she's laying out there, and kind of what's the point? Why are you so interested in this book?
Yeah, so I mean, she reads a lot of Nathaniel Branden. Nathaniel Branden is, a psychologist, and he focuses a lot on self esteem. But one of the concepts he ends up developing is the concept of social metaphysics. And in very basic terms, social metaphysics is when you predicate your values, the information or the information that allows you to guide your actions and how you act as an individual based off of other people, what they value, what they judge, what they consider, et cetera, et cetera. And you don't really have an individual a system of a way of desiring and valuing and something. So you just refer to other people. But that's kind of like a lot of people have a form of second-handedness where they just kind of they fear judgment and they don't have really that self-esteem to kind of trust their own guidance and thinking processes, and so they refer to other people implicitly, and then they use their judgments to guide their actions. But Ann Wortham takes us a little bit step, like a further step, which is more interesting when she talks about like race consciousness. She realizes that it's not about just referring to other people, but there's a process socially where people are not just referring to like other people to inform their actions and their values, but they're referring to certain categories, and these categories are races. And so in one of the chapters, she explicitly talks about biracial people, how they're brought up. A lot of people are not really brought up to have an authentic sense of self-esteem and an individuated guide or way of action and whatnot. And so they're kind of brought up of, what does Johnny think, or what does this person think, or what would my mother think, or what do they value, and how should I act in accordance to that? But when it comes to biracial people, they have that same second-handedness psychology. But what's interesting is that they're too black to be white and too white to be black, and so they're kind of in the middle. And so it's not like they can't. It's not that they can just follow somebody else, but now they're in a situation where they kind of have to choose in a sense, right? So do I choose a black crowd or do I choose the white crowd, right? And in the white crowd, typically they're not usually race conscious, and so they're like, well, if you want to choose like to hang us, like we don't really care, bro. Like whatever.
Yeah.
White people are typically just like do you? I don't really care. But black people have a huge fixation on race consciousness. So if they even hear about the concept of a black of a mixed person saying, well, I'm gonna go do what the white people are doing, you're immediately outcasted. You're looked at as a traitor. You don't know anything about your history. You're not black. You're destroying yourself, like a form of self mutilation or something of that capacity. And because you have the psychology of second-handedness, that other people's opinions and judgments matter, when you listen to all these things that the black community is telling you as a black person, that you're trash and you're a coon, you're whatever, then you kind of feel bad about yourself that you are performing a sense of an injustice not only to yourself but onto them. And so there's a lot of mixed people who are super adamant about not considering themselves biracial or mixed, but they're like, I'm black because my dad's black, and black community and black history and black this. And so race consciousness becomes the psychology where they have to refer to not to their own individual values, but to like the larger like racial category that they belong to, in quotation marks, and they abide by that. And that becomes their source of action, that becomes their source of values, that becomes their source of operation. um and yeah, it really undermines the self. It's an
Uh-huh.
expression of low self-esteem, you know yeah.
All right, so there's a few things I think it's worth clarifying. And you correct these things as you see fit. So it's one, this social metaphysics idea seems to be like, in short, it's basically it's it's this perspective that says there's certain people who basically the way they think is as if their whole world is not like the world, it's other people, it's the world of other people.
Right.
And then Ann Wortham applies this and pretty much says, well, there's some people who are operating on a like their whole world is their tribe or their race. So it's like another kind of, you could maybe a step down or a step up depending on how you want to
Yeah.
think of it, but it's a step down form of this social metaphysics perspective. So it's not just like my world is completely just all about other people and it's formulated in the context of other people only. It's formulated in the context of my race, and those are the others that are like the center of the universe, so to speak. And versus like some type of view where it's like, I'm an individual, there is the world, and I have to move through it as a sort of independent thinker. There is no independent thought. Everything's attached to this group. And then um to clarify, two things. Are you saying that like besides take away the mixed people example, is this a prevalent thing in some parts of the black community overall? Is it something that white people also struggle with? Maybe that's not the focus of her book, but is it something it kind of goes on all level? Maybe it's a similar thing with Jewish people, or and similar things. And then
Yeah.
yeah, is it second? Are you saying it's something that some people just automatically are? They're psychologically built this way, or is it some process of a thought they come to, or a
Mhm.
position they find themselves in because of the way they think or the values they kind of choose to
Mhm.
hold?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've written a 3-part essay on this on my Substack, breaking
Mhm.
each part down. But before we get into that, I mean, Rand talks about this in The Virtue of Selflessness. She has the chapter of racism, and she talks about like the family. The last names, whoever the last name, like my last name is Harper. You know what I'm saying? And my dad's also big on this. Like we're the Harpers. There's a certain way that the Harpers operate, and there's no other family that operates in that same way. And so like the Harper blood, or the Harper dignity, or
Mm.
whatever. And so that's a form. It's not race consciousness, but in that sense, it'll be like family consciousness, where like how I should conduct myself is how the Harpers, as a larger category, how they would conduct themselves, and so that should be my source and guidance of how I should value and act, and so on and so
Is
forth.
it
So
is it that's the way they should conduct themselves, or is that the way they just conduct them? Like, is the claim like that's just how we operate because of our blood, or is it that's how you should operate and you should just coincide with
it's
sort of our, I
well,
don't know, our
but well,
established customs or
Well,
something?
because it's all fantasy, it's kind of a mix of both. It's not clearly defined, but there's
Okay,
an
cool.
instance in which it's like it's genetic. It's like just built into you. And there's the other side where it's like if you do act outside of, I mean, we have free will, but once you do act outside of that norm, then it can be judged, and then it can be evaluated.
Yeah,
And it's
you're
like
not you're
that's
not
not
being your true self or something
exactly.
like that.
So it's kind of a mix of both. But that's a sense of like family consciousness in that sense, and some people would have it where they don't try to fight it, they just kind of like assume it, and so they try to pass it down historically or genetically to their children. They're like, we're a lineage of blah 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 blah, and our great great grandfather was this, and we have to uphold the family line, and it completely ruins any sense of individuality,
So
what you want to do as a person and whatnot. So it completely
break that
eliminates all
down.
that.
And maybe you have some personal anecdotes, or just kind of more, I guess, public, or if historical, or
Yeah.
kind of sociological examples. How does this work on
Yeah.
a kind of personal level or societal level? What's the big deal if people think like this? So what?
I mean, well, number one, the big deal is you matter to yourself. You are the most important asset to yourself, and so if you're performing anything that undermines your own individual values, I think that's problematic. But two, I think it's the bigger picture too is self esteem. Self esteem is this kind of mindset that you have where you trust your own individual faculties and you trust your own values, and you can be able to go out there and produce the things that you want to see in this world. And when you kind of undermine that mechanism, you kind of have a mentality where you're just doing things for other people, and you never really get to live a life of your own. And I think that's the most dangerous thing out of everything. I think that's the mentality that people should steer away from.
Well,
It
well, what's your proof? Like, why do you think that it manifests some way? Like, is is why you're on about this so much because you see a problem out there in the world? Like, where do you see this causing actual issues or becoming a problem? Is this like, are you, for example, to throw something out there, would you say this mentality's behind um BLM, or behind Christian nationalism? Is it the thing that makes it bad? Is it the thing that the thing that corrupts. Take BLM. There's a lot of cases for, like, you could see like there's elements of BLM and the cause and the movement that were good and heading in, trying, you could see a seed of it trying to do something good and
Yeah.
address a real problem.
Mhm.
Is this, are you claiming like this is the thing that undercuts it? Is
Yeah,
or is this, yeah.
I would say I would say I would say race consciousness, especially like black racial consciousness is woefully present within the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, it's just in the title itself, Black Lives Matter. I mean, the whole concept of being black, right? When it comes to BLM, they're not saying black as a phenotypical identifier that we're black or we're just dark skin or we're just colored. There's something about it where like we're black and therefore this means that, like historically or traditionally or something. There's something specific characterologically about being black, and that's their fixation.
And
Um,
we should act like therefore we should act a certain way is
yeah,
the kind
therefore we should act a certain way. We should carry ourselves in a certain way. And I mean, God forbid somebody says, "Yeah, he's black," and he's like, God forbid somebody's like, "I'm black, but I really dislike Tupac." You know what I'm saying? You're an immediate outcasted, or things like that. There's certain things that black people have to like, or God forbid somebody's like, "Yeah, I've never watched Roots," or "I don't really like Roots," or anything like that. Like that, you're just giving them infinite ammunition to just target you at that point.
I
Um,
see.
but I definitely want to go back to kind of like the white people and how is race consciousness really developing in white people. I would argue in American society has always been a thing, especially in the South. In the Confederates and the racists. I think the one of the best examples is Edmund Ruffin. I believe, if I remember correctly,
Who's that?
he was a Confederate. He was a part of the Fire Eaters. He was in
Mm,
agriculture. He did a lot of agricultural science. I believe
real
he had
quick,
some.
what's the Fire Eaters?
Fire Eaters was a band of guys in South Carolina, I want to believe, roughly around the 1830s, and they were the first people to kind of start the Civil War, and they are the reason why South Carolina, if I remember correctly, to be the first to secede from the rest of the Union. But Edmund Ruffin was a part of this guy, or a part of that group, and I'm trying to remember correctly, but he writes a lot of letters, and especially before he commits suicide. He writes a lot of letters, and he's talking about how this is during the time of the Civil War, and the Civil War is ending and whatnot, and the Civil War ended. And he writes his letters to his son, and he's pretty much saying like, us as white people, I feel threatened. I feel like we're losing our ways of life because now we're kind of in a society where black people are getting their freedom and they're no longer slaves and stuff like that. And so the conditions here in this case is that the larger, in his vision, the larger category of being white is being threatened, and because he has race consciousness of being white, him as an individual is feeling threatened.
I
And
see.
that's the relationship between the individual and the larger category. So if you have ground, if you're a second hander and you are told that you belong to a particular category, and there's an instance in which this category, whatever way of life this category, this racial category is supposed to act like and abide by, if that category is getting threatened, you automatically assume that that threat also applies to you.
Yeah.
And so when somebody a part of that category goes through triumph and win, you feel good, but when they go through loss and sorrow, you feel bad. And
Yeah.
that's really the problem. Even though like that's person's an individual, whatever their decisions are and their outcomes is their decisions and outcomes has no bearing on you and it has no relevance.
I
And
see.
this race consciousness is even bigger today. We can hear it in slogans and terms like we're gonna have a white boy summer. People like John Doyle and Nick Fuentes and stuff like that, like saying concepts like that, white boy summer. And it's just explicit, like white boys, like there's something how white boys are supposed to conduct themselves, and it's not supposed to be black. And so we're all supposed to be banding up together and just having a great white boy summer, and all that. So
Yeah. Uh, yeah, that makes sense. And could you break down what you think is the proper alternative to this? Obviously, me and you can kind of, following Camille Foster and kind of that kind of perspective, we kind of consider ourselves race abolitionists, but maybe spell out, and also individualists, to add, I think, something that's important to add to that perspective. Kind of spell out what that means in
yeah.
contrast to this perspective,
Yeah,
or Yeah.
So there's two good points to bring up, right? So race is a social category that's developed based off of some common phenotypical trait that's regarded to be important.
Mhm.
And for it to be considered important, it assumes that this phenotypical trait, that whatever we're talking about, whether it's long noses or dark skin or this type of hair or whatnot, that there's a group of people that have this common trait, and this trait somehow magically influences their values, how they carry themselves as a person. And so you get into characterological categories of people. And once you get different characterological categories, then you can start making hierarchies of this is the better cultural standard in this, and this is how you should conduct it. So, but our point is that race is not a thing. It does not influence the intellect. It does not influence the mind. Everybody's responsible for their own values and decisions, and that's the essence of what it means to be just a human being. And once you have that perspective that everybody has their own individual decisions, you have to judge them according to their individual decisions. And their phenotypical genetics and lineage and whatnot has no direct or any influence on how they think as a person. And so, and also, Ann Wortham in The Other Side of Racism makes a really good point. She says, I can't quote it verbatim, but she says that um, race has no metaphysical relevance. Like it's given to us like via metaphysics, in the sense of our genetics. But it's only metaphysical. It's not in the category of virtue or morality or any of that. It doesn't influence how we operate as people. And so when you accept that,
We'll
like,
pause there because I guess just to clarify, I guess that what that means is, I guess what she means by that is like whether or not getting into like what the actual biological ways in which race works and how much genetics, how much DNA me and you share, or is it half of you that me and you share the same DNA, or do I have more in common with someone who's not biracial, for example, which I take it is not true, and that's actually not how the DNA and genetics works. It's fully possible that I could genetically have stuff more in common with a Spanish person than another black person. And that's the kind of weird things about the underlying science. The point is like that stuff is sort of the given by like nature, reality.
right,
Like we kind of come into existence with that.
yeah,
But that doesn't actually have any import in what really makes kind of our type of existence valuable,
right,
important, distinct, which I take it is like the way I think about it, I guess, is the Frederick Douglass kind of perspective on we're self-made men,
mm-hmm,
and adding to that the Ayn Rand perspective, because we're self-made men of kind of material means and productive means, we're also self-made men of our own character and souls. Like, and that's a that's not a product of how you were born.
mm-hmm.
um Although I guess it's important to say how you're born is something for you to contemplate and choose how it fits into your character, but it's not something that determines your character.
Yeah, I,
Like,
I I think there's a part of that that's true in a sense, because like how you're born, there's a lot to that in a sense, right? But Harry Benswinger in actually the Objectivist Forum, he has a article about the concept of perfection, and how historically perfection has been regarded as something divine and supernatural, but it's like what is a human conceptualization of perfection actually means. And he says that, and it's a really good point. It's a really good point. He says there's no concept of perfection that applies to metaphysics, because when an acorn exists and a mouse exists, or an acorn exists and a piece of grass exists, they just exist. They just are. There's no standard or hierarchy you can place in between them and weigh them, and they just exist. They just
like
are.
this
Period.
is the best type of it. This is a perfect acorn versus an imperfect acorn or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, but because there's no standard, they just exist. They just are. But
Yeah.
when you introduce, some organism that has free will, some capacity to make a decision, now we can start thinking about what's imperfect, what's perfect. What standards are being fulfilled, what standards are not being fulfilled. And this is the same kind of concept in this case, right? When we are born with phenotypical traits, it's just metaphysically given. It's a default. It's our starting point, but it has no bearing on the decisions that we make. The decisions we make is what becomes perfect and imperfect, not just, hey, I'm black, and it's like, oh my goodness, he's imperfect. It's like, no, I'm just am, just is.
Mm. Yeah, and I take it that goes along with like, because I could see most of the objections to this type of thing. People would say, well, are you saying that in the world we live in the current day, or even back 60, 100 years or 100 years ago, being black just straight up didn't matter or something like that? And I take it like that's not your point. Um, especially since, yeah, it is a reality. It is part of the world that other people thought of you as black as something significant. And yeah, you being born in, say, Africa versus being born under, 17th century England or something, that is a context for you to think about and form values.
Mm-hmm.
But like, the important thing isn't that you were born black and people are currently racist to blacks. It's, well, what do you think about being born black? What do you think about, or what do you think about being born in a world where people view you this way and you
Yeah.
also have the choice to view yourself a certain way,
Yeah.
and ultimately choose what type of life you want to live?
Yeah, this is, I mean, I think it's a huge mistake to kind of over philosophize this concept, because it's a very basic one. Because it starts off, you're human, you're an individual, and you have individual values, and you have individual choices to make. It's very simple. Just live your life, period. It doesn't matter who's around you or what type of magical category that you belong to. But if we're going to go back 100 years ago, there is a sense where you have to be aware of your race, that like white people hate black people and I am black. Like, that's something you have to be aware of, because that directly influences how you should navigate socially and make sure that you're not lynched or killed or et cetera, et cetera. That's a real thing. But you're not aware of your racial category and the values that magically exist within this category, and how that influences your actions. What you're actually aware of are other people's judgments about that racial category, and that's the thing that should really influence how you should act and how you should navigate. So there's a very sharp line. It's a difference between me and the racial category and us having a relationship of how I should act, versus me and some other people's judgment about this racial category and how I should act.
Yeah. And that, I guess, that stems from ultimately recognizing that like this racial category is also kind of an arbitrary made up thing that
Yeah,
like isn't real.
yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Is there any other ways in which you think, before we close out, um, where this kind of insight pops up today and in like kind of like if someone, because where would we, it's kind of easy to think about in the past, um the importance of this, or where this pops up, or how society um like really suffers from this.
Yeah.
What about today? Where do you think like this thing is most prevalent and causing the most harm?
Yeah. Man, so I mean, there's cultural, there's political. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, a cultural. We're talking about cultural. Berating people culturally, saying, you're a traitor to your race and things like that. Or just trying to boycott people. And there's this really famous black lady on Instagram. I think she's got like over 1 million followers, but she's
Mhm.
in China, and she practices like a bunch of Chinese cultural traditions. And there's a lot of black people in her comments. It's like, hey, shot, you're black. Like, what are you doing? Like, you need to go find your roots and stuff like that. And so, and she doesn't really care. She's like, I'm just doing whatever I feel like doing. And it's like, this is what I like. And so this is what I'm going to do. And so,
Yeah.
there's things like that, on Instagram and socially and whatnot, and how people engage and talk to each other. But in the realm of politics, it's far much worse. And the reason being is because, I mean, they treat these categories as a monolith. There's a, when people talk about black people are more likely to X, Y, and Z, the next question that should flow out of the listener's mouth is, which black people? which ones? The ones who do X, Y, and Z, the one who read books, or the ones that have a job, or the ones, there's a lot of distinguishing. Like once you break down these statistics into categories of choices and not the race, the conversation shifts dramatically.
Right.
And so, but treating them as a monolith only just because, black people, I think that's a problem. That's a huge mistake. And I think we should break down statistics not according to race, but the decisions that people make.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense to me because it sounds like, and I definitely agree with the point that like what makes what these statistics are try really reveal to us isn't there is no quote unquote black people doing anything. There's individual people who make decisions, and at best we can when we can't get into people's heads, we can see what kind of choices sort people into certain activities. And like what we really start to discover is that these activities reveal, you know, more about the group we're trying to isolate and study than just simply lumping together and saying black people, which makes a lot of sense. That was really good.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
and I'll just close on this when people say like, Americans are really bad or Americans are really racist or which Americans,
yeah, which Americans?
which
Yeah,
ones?
yeah,
So, yeah.
very good point. All right.